The most dangerous prison cells in America shock documentary. The door doesn't just close behind them, it seals. Not in a dramatic way like in movies, but in a quiet, final way that slowly sinks in. One moment, there is still a connection to the outside world. The next, it's gone. What replaces it is a small concrete space, controlled down to the smallest detail. This is the reality inside some of the most dangerous prison cells in America. Places like ADX Florence in Colorado were not built for ordinary inmates. They were designed for people the system believes cannot be managed anywhere else. People who have caused serious harm, or who are considered too risky to be around others. The kind of inmates correctional officers cannot afford to make mistakes around. Inside these cells, control is everything. The walls are solid concrete. The bed is concrete. Even the desk is part of the wall. There are no bars to hold on to, no loose objects to move around. Just a heavy door with a small slot where food is passed through. Every detail has a purpose, and that purpose is to remove risk. Inmates here spend most of their day alone, sometimes up to 23 hours inside the same small room. Meals happen there. Sleep happens there. Thinking happens there. Day after day, the routine barely changes. For some people, that kind of isolation becomes the hardest part to deal with. It's not just about being locked up. It's about being cut off. No real conversations. No physical contact. No sense of normal time. Just silence, broken only by footsteps in the hallway or the sound of metal doors opening and closing somewhere far away. Some inmates try to stay focused. They read whatever books they can get. They write letters. They create routines just to feel some control over their own day. Small things that help them hold onto a sense of self. But not everyone handles it the same way. For others, the silence starts to feel heavy. Time slows down in a way that is hard to explain unless you've lived it. Hours feel like days. Days feel like weeks. And the mind begins to react to that kind of emptiness. This is where the real debate begins. There are people who believe these prison cells are necessary. They argue that some inmates have shown they cannot safely live among others. That without strict control, they could harm staff or other inmates. From that point of view, places like this are not about punishment but about protection. At the same time, others look at these conditions and ask a different question. They ask what happens to a person after years of isolation. They wonder whether the human mind is meant to exist in that kind of environment for so long. And they question whether safety can come at that cost. It's not a simple argument. There are no easy answers. Because on one side, there is the need for security. And on the other, there is the reality that every person inside those walls is still human. Correctional officers live in that tension every day. Their job is not just to enforce rules, but to do it carefully, consistently, and without error. Every movement is planned. Every door is controlled. Every interaction matters. Because in a place like this, even a small mistake can have serious consequences. And yet, beyond all the systems and structures, there is something else that often gets overlooked. Behind every one of those doors is a person with a story, a path that led them there, decisions that cannot be undone, and time, a lot of time to think about all of it. That is what makes these cells different. Not just the concrete walls, not just the locked doors, but the weight of everything that comes with being inside them. If you stand in one of these prison units long enough, you begin to notice something strange. It's not the noise that stands out. It's the lack of it. There is no shouting crowd, no constant movement, just quiet, controlled motion. A door opens. A tray slides through. Footsteps pass by. Then silence again. And in that silence, something happens that many people on the outside don't think about. Time changes. For inmates in these high-security cells, time doesn't feel normal anymore. There are no busy days to make hours pass quickly. No distractions like work, friends, or family gatherings. Just long stretches of stillness, where every minute feels longer than it should. Some inmates begin to count time in small ways. Meals, steps, days between letters, anything that gives a sense of movement. Because without that, everything starts to blur together. And that's where the mental challenge becomes real. You see, prison is not only about physical confinement. It's also about what happens inside a person's mind. When someone is placed in isolation for long periods, the mind looks for something to hold on to. Memories become stronger. Regrets feel heavier. Small thoughts grow bigger. Some inmates begin to replay moments from their past over and over again. The decisions they made, the people they hurt, the chances they missed. And in a place where there is nothing to distract you, those thoughts don't go away easily. For some, this becomes a turning point. There are inmates who use that time to reflect deeply, to think about who they were and who they could have been. They write letters to family members they haven't seen in years. They read books, sometimes the same ones again and again, trying to find meaning or understanding. In rare cases, people even begin to change. But not everyone responds that way. There are others who struggle under that pressure. The silence that once seemed peaceful becomes overwhelming. The lack of human contact begins to affect how they think and feel. Some report feeling disconnected from reality. Others lose track of time completely. And this is where the system faces one of its biggest challenges. How do you manage inmates who are considered dangerous, while also dealing with the effects of long-term isolation? Correctional officers are trained to maintain order, but they are also witnesses to what happens inside these cells over time. They see the routines. They see the changes in behavior. And they understand that this environment is not easy for anyone involved. Even something as simple as moving an inmate out of their cell requires careful planning. Multiple officers are present. Instructions are clear. Every action is controlled step by step. Because in these environments, safety cannot be left to chance. But outside these walls, people continue to ask questions. Is this level of control necessary? Or is it too much? Some argue that certain inmates have proven they cannot safely exist in a less restricted environment. That without strict conditions, they pose a real danger. From that point of view, these cells are not about being harsh, but about preventing harm. Others look at it differently. They point out that many inmates will one day leave prison and return to society. And they ask what kind of effect years of isolation will have on a person who is expected to live a normal life again. Will they be able to adjust? Will they trust others? Will they feel connected to the world outside? These are questions that do not have simple answers. And yet they are important, because behind every policy, every locked door, and every rule, there are real human lives involved. Take a moment to imagine this. You wake up in the same room you fell asleep in. You eat in that same room. You spend your entire day there. Maybe you get 1 hour alone in a small yard, surrounded by high walls, with a small patch of sky above you. Then you return to the same space again, day after day, week after week, year after year. At some point, it stops feeling like a temporary situation. It starts to feel permanent. And that is the reality for many inmates in these high-security cells. But even in a place designed for control, there are still moments that remind you of something deeper. A letter arriving from a family member. A book that speaks to something personal. A quiet moment where an inmate sits and simply thinks. Those moments don't change the environment, but they change how it is experienced. They remind us that even in the most controlled places, the human mind is still active, still searching, still trying to make sense of things. And maybe that is what makes these prison cells so complex. It's not just about walls and locks. It's about what happens inside them. Because while the system focuses on control, the people inside are dealing with something else entirely. Their past, their choices, and the long stretch of time ahead of them. And as long as these places exist, the debate will continue. About safety, about fairness, about what justice should look like. But one thing remains clear. These are not just the most dangerous prison cells in America because of who they hold. They are dangerous because of what they represent. A place where control is absolute, where silence is constant, and where every person inside is left alone with the weight of their own story. At some point, the story always becomes personal. Up to now, it might feel like we are talking about systems, buildings, and rules. But behind every one of these heavy doors is a real person who made choices that changed everything. Take the case of inmates who end up inside places like ADX Florence. These are not random individuals. Many of them were once part of organized crime groups. Some led violent operations. Others committed acts that shocked entire communities. By the time they arrive here, the system has already decided that normal prison conditions are not enough. And that decision changes everything about how they live. Inside these cells, even the smallest actions are controlled. When an inmate leaves the cell, their hands are restrained. Movement is slow and watched carefully. Communication with others is extremely limited. Every step is designed to reduce risk. But what often gets missed is what happens after the door closes again. Because once the officers walk away, the inmate is left alone with nothing but time. And time has a way of bringing everything back. Memories don't stay quiet in a place like this. They come forward. Moments from the past replay again and again. For some, it's the crime itself. For others, it's the people they left behind. Family members, friends. A life that feels very far away now. In that space, there are no distractions to escape from those thoughts. And that's where the real weight begins. Some inmates begin to understand the full impact of their actions for the first time. Not in a courtroom, not during sentencing, but in the silence of a small concrete room where there is nowhere else to look but inward. Others struggle to accept it. They hold on to anger, blame, frustration. And in an environment with very little human interaction, those emotions can grow stronger instead of fading away. This is why these prison cells are often described as more than just physical confinement. They are mental spaces as well, places where the mind is forced to face itself, sometimes for years without interruption. And this is where the conversation becomes even more complex. Because when people on the outside hear about these conditions, they often react in very different ways. Some believe it is justified. They point to the seriousness of the crimes committed and argue that strong measures are necessary to protect others. They see these cells as a way to prevent further harm, especially from individuals who have shown a pattern of dangerous behavior. But others look at the same situation and ask a different question. They ask what happens to a human being after spending so much time alone. They wonder if long-term isolation changes a person in ways that cannot be undone. And they question whether safety should come at that cost. These are not easy questions. And the truth is, both sides raise important points. Because on one hand, the responsibility to protect lives is real. Correctional facilities must ensure the safety of staff and other inmates. There are cases where individuals have proven they cannot safely exist in a less controlled environment. But on the other hand, there is also the question of humanity. No matter what someone has done, they are still a person. And the way they are treated can shape what they become in the future. This matters even more when you consider that not every inmate will stay in these conditions forever. Some will eventually be moved. Some may even return to society one day. And when that happens, the effects of their time inside these cells do not simply disappear. They carry it with them. The silence, the isolation, the routines, the way time felt, the way thoughts changed, all of it stays. That is why some experts continue to study these environments carefully. They want to understand how isolation affects the human mind. They want to know what can be improved, what should be changed, and what must remain in place for safety. Because this is not just about prisons. It is about people. And it is about what happens when control becomes the main focus of an environment for long periods of time. But even in the middle of all this, there are moments that stand out. Moments that remind us that change is still possible. There have been inmates who used their time in isolation to reflect deeply on their past. Who chose to read, to learn, to think differently. Who began to understand the consequences of their actions in a way they never had before. These cases are not the majority, but they exist. And they show that even in the most controlled environments, the human mind still has the ability to grow. At the same time, there are also stories that remind us how difficult this environment can be. Stories of inmates who struggled under the weight of isolation, who found it hard to stay mentally strong, who faced challenges that went beyond the physical walls around them. These stories matter too, because they show the full picture, not just one side, And that is what makes this topic so powerful. It forces us to look at both safety and humanity at the same time. It forces us to ask what justice really means. Is it only about punishment? Is it about protection? Or is it something more complex than that? As you think about these questions, it becomes clear that there is no simple answer. Only real situations, real people, and real consequences. And maybe that is the most important part of this entire story. Because when we talk about the most dangerous prison cells in America, it is easy to focus on the structure, the concrete, the locked doors, the strict routines. But what truly defines these places is not the design. It is what happens inside them, the thoughts, the memories, the changes, the struggles, and sometimes the understanding that comes too late. In the end, these cells are not just about holding people in. They are about holding moments still. Moments where time slows down enough for everything to be seen clearly, for better or worse. And for the people inside, that reality does not end when the lights go off. Continues, every single day. Because once that door closes, the world outside keeps moving. But inside, everything stands still. And that is what makes these the most dangerous prison cells in America. Not just because of who they hold, but because of what they do to the people inside them. And maybe more importantly, what they make us question about justice itself.